Imagine standing in the frozen streets of a city under siege. The wind cuts through your coat like sharpened steel, and the sky is a swirling canvas of smoke and fire. Every sound an echoing explosion, a distant cry feels closer, closer than it should. Food is scarce. Hope, scarcer. One wrong step, 1 second of hesitation, and survival slips through your fingers. Leningrad, September 1941. The German army presses its might against the city walls, determined to crush one of the Soviet Union's proudest jewels. The Red Army, stretched thin and battered by months of retreat, scrambles to fortify what it can. Civilians barricade themselves in apartments, schools, and basements, each heartbeat a silent defiance against the storm gathering outside. Frosty nights stretch endlessly. Hunger gnaws at the edges of human endurance. Yet amid the devastation, the people of Leningrad hold fast. Every rationed loaf, every whispered prayer, every courageous act is a rebellion against the encroaching shadow. Welcome, history warriors, I'm Knightley, your guide through the harrowing streets, the echoing bunkers, and the resilient hearts of a city that refused to fall. You're about to witness history like never before. As the storm of war gathers on the horizon, the city braces for the coming clash that will test courage, strategy, and survival itself, and set the stage for an unimaginable ordeal. Next, we step into the heart of the conflict, understanding the forces, the stakes, and the storm that surrounds Leningrad. The year was 1941. Europe was already ablaze, but in the north of the Soviet Union, a city of immense history, culture, and resilience prepared to face a storm unlike any it had ever known. Leningrad, formerly St. Petersburg, stood as a jewel on the Neva River, a city of museums, cathedrals, and industrial might. Its streets had seen revolutions, czars, and emperors. Now, they would witness a siege that would test human endurance to the very edge. Across the western plains of the Soviet Union, the German Wehrmacht advanced with the precision and confidence of a military machine at its peak. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, had sent millions of Axis troops sweeping eastward, catching the Soviet forces off guard. By late summer, the German Northern Army groups had carved a path through the Baltic states and northern Russia, isolating Leningrad and surrounding it like a tightening noose. The stakes were immense. Capturing Leningrad was not merely a military objective, it was a blow to Soviet morale, a symbolic conquest meant to shatter the spirit of a nation. Hitler's command envisioned a swift victory, one that would secure the northern flank, allow access to the resources of the Russian heartland, and demonstrate the inexorable power of the Reich. The defenders, however, were a mix of hardened Red Army units, hastily conscripted recruits, and civilians determined to defend their city. Marshal Kliment Voroshilov had overseen initial fortifications, while the rising command of General Georgy Zhukov would soon shape defensive strategy. Each side moved with a clarity of purpose, yet both underestimated the human cost that lay ahead. As summer waned, the city's population swelled. Refugees poured in from surrounding areas, swelling the ranks of those who would endure hunger, cold, and constant bombardment. The Neva River glinted under a late summer sun, but its calm surface belied the terror approaching from the forests and plains beyond. Planes droned overhead, reconnaissance flights tracing every defensive line, every factory, every street that might serve as a stronghold. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies, their bombers slicing through clouds, their targets the city's railways, bridges, and industrial centers. The German strategy was clear: isolate, starve, and shatter. Yet, Leningrad's defenders had something the invaders could not fully anticipate: a city's determination to survive, to hold on to life even as food ran out, as temperatures dropped, as shells tore apart homes. In the months leading to the siege, the Northern Army Group, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm von Lieb, meticulously mapped the city's perimeters. Infantry, artillery, and armored divisions moved into position, forming a cordon meant to sever supply lines. Each regiment carried detailed orders, each soldier trained to strike quickly and decisively. The German war machine operated with brutal efficiency, yet Leningrad itself was no passive target. Its canals, narrow streets, and fortified suburbs presented obstacles that maps alone could not overcome. The civilian population became part of the war effort. Factories continued producing arms, workshops repaired equipment, and every able-bodied person contributed to fortifications. The city's newspapers printed instructions for rationing, for blackout procedures, for emergency protocols. Leningrad's spirit was not idle. It moved, adapted, resisted. Children helped carry firewood, women filled sandbags, men built barricades. Survival was not only a military necessity, it was a communal act of defiance. As September approached, the German forces tightened their perimeter. Rail lines were cut, roads mined, and river crossings patrolled with ruthless precision. Any attempt to escape the city became nearly impossible. Supplies dwindled, and winter whispered its icy threat across the horizon. The city's food reserves were meager, and plans to transport provisions across Lake Ladoga were limited by German air and artillery control. Each day became a delicate negotiation with hunger, each hour a test of willpower. The psychological landscape was as critical as the physical one. Propaganda from both sides sought to undermine morale. German leaflets promised surrender as a path to survival, while Soviet broadcasts reminded citizens of the glory and necessity of resistance. Fear mingled with courage, exhaustion with determination. The people of Leningrad, soldiers and civilians alike, braced for an ordeal that would blur the line between life and death, war and survival. Beyond the immediate front lines, the broader context of the Eastern Front influenced every move. The Soviet Union, reeling from early defeats, struggled to reorganize its command structure and logistics. Stalin himself was in constant contact with front commanders, issuing directives sometimes contradictory, sometimes inspired. Military advisors debated the feasibility of counterattacks, of supply drops, of evacuations. Meanwhile, Hitler's directives pressed for relentless pressure, leaving little room for negotiation or delay. The winter of 1941 promised to be brutal. Already, northern Russia had begun its descent into freezing temperatures. Snow would soon blanket the roads, the fields, the city itself. For the defenders, every loaf of bread, every ration of firewood, every repair to the water and power systems would be magnified in importance. For the attackers, the cold offered both opportunity and challenge, a means to weaken the city, but also a test of their own logistics and endurance. Yet the strategic stakes went beyond the city. Leningrad was a port on the Baltic Sea, a hub for communications, supplies, and morale. Its fall would open the gateway for German advances toward the Soviet heartland. It would signal to the world that the Red Army was vulnerable, that the Axis advance could be relentless and unstoppable. For the Soviets, holding Leningrad was more than a defensive operation. It was a declaration that some things, some cities, some people could not be surrendered without a fight. From September onward, the tension in and around Leningrad became palpable. Soldiers manned checkpoints, artillery crews prepared for the inevitable, civilians adjusted their lives to the rhythm of air raid sirens and the thrum of distant shell fire. The city itself became a battlefield, not only in the military sense but in the psychological and human sense. Every citizen, every soldier, every corner of the city contributed to a theater of survival that would last 872 days. The historical record is precise. Over 2 years, nearly 750,000 people perished from hunger, disease, and shelling. Yet these numbers, staggering as they are, only hint at the human courage, ingenuity, and endurance that defined the siege. Citizens scavenged for food, created substitutes, and devised ingenious ways to survive. Factories turned out military supplies under dire conditions. Hospitals struggled to care for the sick while remaining operational under bombardment. Every action was a choice between despair and resilience, a decision to live another day in a city encircled by death. From the German perspective, the siege was a calculated gamble. Starve the city and its defenders would crumble, cut off supplies, and the Red Army would be forced to surrender. Yet the human element, determination, improvisation, and sheer willpower proved far more resilient than calculations on a map. German intelligence underestimated the spirit of the population, the resourcefulness of commanders, and the fortifications hastily built in every district. In this tense atmosphere, the first weeks of the siege became a test of nerves for both sides. Skirmishes along the perimeter, reconnaissance flights, and artillery duels set the stage for a prolonged struggle. The city braced itself not only for attack, but for endurance. Winter would come, supplies would dwindle, decisions would carry life and death consequences. Every hour was a measure of patience, strategy, and courage. By the end of September, Leningrad was isolated. The city's ports on the Neva River were under constant observation, bridges destroyed and supply routes cut. The German lines formed a tight crescent around the city, leaving only the frozen Lake Ladoga as a tenuous link to the outside world. This road of life, as it would later be called, became a lifeline, but also a dangerous gamble under enemy fire and winter storms. The stage was set. The players were in position. The civilians, the Red Army, and the German Wehrmacht were poised for a confrontation that would push human endurance to its limits. Leningrad would either break under the relentless pressure of encirclement or redefine the limits of human resilience in wartime. And so, with the city bracing for the coming storm, the broader currents of history converged on a single point: a city under siege, a nation watching, and a world witnessing what it meant to survive against all odds. Next, we delve into the strategic build-up, exploring the minds of commanders, the deployment of armies, the technologies at play, and the silent tension that preceded the storm. The days before the siege were a blur of preparation, tension, and calculation. On the northern flank, Field Marshal Wilhelm von Leeb reviewed maps under the dim light of a command tent. His eyes traced every road, every bridge, every defensive line surrounding Leningrad. Intelligence reports predicted resistance, but he trusted the precision of German planning, the discipline of his soldiers. His strategy was clear: encircle the city, cut it off, and let winter and hunger do what direct assault could not. Meanwhile, in Leningrad, General Georgy Zhukov moved swiftly through the streets, inspecting barricades, troop positions, and supply depots. Known for his meticulous planning and unflinching determination, Zhukov understood the stakes. He ordered every factory, school, and warehouse to become a defensive asset. Artillery pieces were dug into streets and parks, ready to fire upon advancing troops. Trenches carved through frozen earth, sandbags stacked to form temporary bastions. The city was a fortress under construction, though time was scarce. Civilians became integral to the strategy. Men dug trenches, women filled sandbags, and children carried firewood to the front lines. Factories that once produced luxury goods now churned out rifles, shells, and makeshift armor. Even the city's hospitals were mobilized to maintain morale and treat those injured in preliminary skirmishes. Every resource was weaponized. Every human being became part of the defense. On the German side, logistics were a calculated ballet. Supply trains moved relentlessly eastward, bringing artillery shells, ammunition, and rations. Panzer divisions practiced maneuvers on open fields outside Leningrad's perimeter. Luftwaffe squadrons rehearsed bombing runs, calculating trajectories to strike factories, rail yards, and the city's defenses with devastating precision. Timing was everything. A single misstep could stall the operation and give the Soviets precious time to reinforce their positions. The Soviet defensive doctrine blended traditional military strategy with the improvisation forced by circumstance. Mines were hidden beneath roads, booby traps disguised as rubble, snipers positioned in windows to slow advancing units. Every building became a potential stronghold, every alley a kill zone. Zhukov's orders emphasized mobility, deception, and attrition, turning the city itself into a weapon. Communication became a lifeline. Couriers braved sniper fire to deliver orders. Radio operators worked around the clock to coordinate troop movements. Signals intelligence intercepted German messages, providing fleeting glimpses into enemy plans. In this tense prelude, every decision could tip the balance between survival and annihilation. Winter approached rapidly. Soldiers drilled in sub-zero temperatures, learning to move silently, to camouflage equipment, to conserve energy. Civilians were trained in basic medical care, fire watching, and ration distribution. Engineers reinforced bridges, repaired roads, and built makeshift barriers along the city's approaches. Leningrad itself became a classroom, training an entire population for the war to come. German reconnaissance flights mapped every street, every park, and every industrial complex. Spotters reported troop concentrations, supply depots, and areas of potential weakness. Panzer columns rehearsed rapid encirclement maneuvers. Artillery units dug in positions calculated to cut off supply routes. Von Lieb's confidence was formidable, yet he underestimated one key variable, the human element. Inside Leningrad, morale became a weapon. Propaganda posters urged citizens to resist, to endure, to fight not just for survival, but for the soul of the city. Underground theaters staged plays to distract children. Radio broadcasts relayed reports of heroism and defiance, sustaining a fragile sense of hope. This psychological preparation was as vital as the trenches and cannons. It was the invisible armor of a city under siege. As German forces advanced into position, tension crackled like electricity across the front lines. Scouts reported minor skirmishes. Artillery occasionally cracked through the horizon. Soldiers on both sides sensed that the first day of real combat was imminent. Orders were given, maps studied, and contingencies rehearsed. Every general understood that the coming clash would not be decided by numbers alone, but by strategy, endurance, and adaptability. The Soviet Navy contributed to the city's defense, transforming riverboats into floating artillery platforms along the Neva. Guns were mounted on barges, crews drilled tirelessly, and the waterways became both a defensive perimeter and a supply channel. Even ice and fog were tactical tools, concealing movements, masking troop positions, and delaying German reconnaissance. Every natural feature of the city was weaponized. Zhukov coordinated with local partisan networks operating in the forests outside Leningrad. These irregular fighters gathered intelligence, sabotaged enemy supply lines, and ambushed reconnaissance teams. Their actions were small in scale but immense in impact, forcing German commanders to allocate troops for rear area security and slowing the tightening encirclement. Winter preparations accelerated. Civilians learned to insulate homes, to create communal kitchens, and to store water when pipes froze. Factories produced makeshift stoves and improvised heating devices. Each effort, though small, contributed to the city's capacity to survive months of deprivation and relentless attack. On the German side, panzer and infantry divisions were positioned in concentric arcs. Artillery pieces, meticulously camouflaged, covered every approach. The Luftwaffe performed mock bombing runs, calibrating for accuracy against industrial zones and key intersections. Officers drilled soldiers on rapid encirclement, anticipating Soviet counterattacks. The machinery of war was ready, but experience in urban siege was limited. Civilian evacuation plans were discussed, but mostly impossible. Refugees continued to pour into the city, swelling population density and complicating logistics. Food, already scarce, would now have to stretch further. Hospitals braced for waves of injured soldiers and civilians alike. Every street, every building became part of the strategic calculus. German intelligence underestimated one factor repeatedly: the indomitable spirit of the city. Reports suggested that starvation alone could force surrender. They did not account for human innovation, improvised rationing systems, clandestine bakeries, and citizens melting snow for water. The city's resilience was not quantifiable on any map or report. By early September, German forces cut most overland supply routes. The Red Army consolidated positions along the periphery, creating layered defenses. Sniper nests, barricades, and hidden mines transformed streets into kill zones. Every decision by the German command risked casualties or delays, making precise execution essential. Propaganda became strategic. Leningrad newspapers instructed citizens on rationing while maintaining morale. Radio broadcasts bolstered confidence and relayed Soviet victories elsewhere to inspire hope. Psychological endurance was as critical as weaponry. In every apartment, every school, every factory, strategy intertwined with survival. Both sides relied heavily on reconnaissance. German spotters, perched on surrounding hills, sketched maps of streets and industrial zones. Soviet scouts, often civilians disguised as laborers, reported troop concentrations, artillery positions, and patrol patterns. The war of information intensified, each side seeking an advantage before the first shots were fired. Even the harsh northern climate became a factor in strategic planning. German troops trained in sub-zero conditions, learning to preserve equipment and maintain operational readiness. Soviet troops, more accustomed to winter hardships, used this knowledge to plan ambushes, create icebound obstacles, and fortify positions that would withstand artillery barrages. In the days before the siege, both commanders walked the fine line between anticipation and anxiety. Von Lieb inspected tanks and infantry columns, confident yet aware of the risks. Zhukov patrolled makeshift forts, checking for weak points, distributing orders, and ensuring coordination between Red Army units and civilian auxiliaries. The city itself became an instrument of war. Street layouts, canals, and rail lines were mapped into defensive zones. Factories produced weapons while serving as strongpoints. Parks and public squares became firing zones. Every element of urban geography was analyzed, exploited, and fortified. Supplies were stockpiled with precision. Caches of food, ammunition, and medical equipment were hidden in basements and underground shelters. Each distribution was calculated to prolong resistance. Civilians were instructed on rationing. Soldiers were briefed on conserving ammunition. Every day of preparation could mean the difference between survival and disaster. German artillery units rehearsed firing schedules meticulously. Targets were marked with precision. Engineers adjusted trajectories for elevation, distance, and wind. Artillery duels, once the siege began, would be deadly. But even before combat, the calculation of firepower created a palpable tension. The Luftwaffe's role grew increasingly central. Bombing runs were synchronized with artillery fire, designed to disrupt supply lines and demoralize the population. Reconnaissance planes scanned continuously, photographing fortifications, troop movements, and makeshift bridges. Air superiority would define the opening weeks of the siege. Soviet leadership understood this. Anti-aircraft positions were installed on rooftops, armored cars patrolled streets, and civilian volunteers learned basic spotting techniques. Smoke screens were deployed to obscure key targets, and civilians assisted in moving artillery or supplies to safe zones. The city became a living, breathing weapon of resistance. Local knowledge proved invaluable. Citizens guided Red Army units through narrow streets, secret courtyards, and hidden passages. Factories, churches, and schools were transformed into defensive hubs. Snipers took positions in attics. Barricades were constructed overnight. Leningrad was no longer just a city. It was a labyrinth of resistance, a web designed to frustrate and slow the enemy. As September gave way to October, both sides reached peak readiness. German forces were arrayed for encirclement, while Leningrad's defenders fortified every conceivable approach. Supply lines were stretched to their limits. Civilians were exhausted but resolute. Trenches, barricades, and sniper nests bristled with readiness. Every participant understood that the coming battle would not be brief. The psychological duel intensified. German officers believed swift victory was possible, yet they feared attrition and civilian ingenuity. Soviet commanders anticipated heavy losses, but trusted in the endurance of the city's population. Strategy now blended with sheer human will. Victory or survival would be determined not only by tactics but by stamina, patience, and resolve. Finally, the city waited, silent but tense. Snow dusted rooftops prematurely. The distant rumble of tanks hinted at imminent arrival. Scout planes traced patterns across the sky. Soldiers, civilians, engineers, and commanders alike prepared for the inevitable collision of machine, mind, and human spirit. Silence before the storm. Next, we witnessed the clash, the first explosive days of battle, where streets become front lines, factories turn into forts, and survival hangs on every decision. Battle begins. The first light of dawn cut through the smoky horizon. Tanks rumbled along frozen roads, their metal treads groaning under the weight of impending conflict. German infantry advanced in tight formations, rifles ready, eyes scanning for movement. From the city, snipers watched, breath frozen, hearts hammering, waiting for the first mistake to exploit. Artillery boomed like thunder. Shells tore through the outskirts of the city, shattering walls and sending plumes of dust into the sky. Windows rattled, pavements cracked, and the first cries of alarm echoed through narrow streets. Leningrad was no longer peaceful. It had become a battlefield. From rooftops, Red Army soldiers trained their sights on advancing troops. Civilians reinforced barricades as shells landed closer. Smoke and dust mingled with the winter air, obscuring vision and complicating every movement. One misstep could be fatal, yet retreat was impossible. Tanks collided with barricades in a metallic screech. Machine guns rattled, cutting through smoke and morning haze. Urban warfare was chaotic. Streets turned into corridors of fire, alleys into deadly traps. The city itself fought back. Every street corner a sniper's perch, every doorway a firing position. German engineers attempted to breach fortified zones. Mines exploded underfoot, forcing infantry to pause. The calculated advance slowed as civilians and soldiers improvised defenses, turning ordinary homes into strong points. The tension was palpable. The city resisted with ferocity unexpected by the attackers. Aircraft screamed overhead. Luftwaffe bombers released payloads with surgical intent. Factories, bridges and fortifications targeted to disrupt the defenders. Anti-aircraft crews returned fire, their rounds tracing arcs of silver against a sky dark with smoke. Every second the battle shifted, an endless dance of destruction and resistance. On the streets, small groups of soldiers engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. Every rooftop became a sniper's nest, every alley a killing field. Civilians guided troops through hidden passages, delivering supplies, carrying the wounded, or barricading doors to slow enemy progress. The city itself became a weapon. The Neva River shivered under bombardment. Floating artillery platforms returned fire, each salvo measured to slow advancing tanks and disrupt infantry formations. Ice cracked under shells, splintering into jagged shards. Engineers scrambled to reinforce bridges, anticipating the enemy's attempts to cross. Day turned to night, but the battle never paused. Street lamps flickered under artillery fire. Fires burned uncontrolled in residential zones. Smoke and embers swirled, mixing with the bitter northern wind. The city had become a labyrinth of chaos and survival. The German advance faltered as logistical difficulties surfaced. Tanks bogged down in debris. Infantry became vulnerable in narrow streets. Every effort to push forward was met with ingenuity from the defenders' improvised barricades, hidden gun nests, and sudden ambushes. The city refused to surrender. From command posts, officers barked orders through the chaos. German regiments attempted coordinated assaults, but communication lines were fragile, interrupted by destruction and smoke. In Leningrad, commanders like Zhukov adapted quickly, moving reserves, repositioning artillery, and exploiting every German misstep. Meanwhile, civilians endured. Children huddled in basements. Women delivered ammunition and water. The elderly maintained communal kitchens. Every person became part of the battle effort, transforming survival into resistance. Even under bombardment, morale flickered like a stubborn candle. In the northern sectors, tanks clashed with barricades in explosions of metal and fire. Infantry fought street by street, building by building. Smoke and dust created illusions. Snipers struck from unexpected angles. The city's geography became as deadly as the weapons themselves. Luftwaffe pilots struggled with icy winds and sudden flak from anti-aircraft guns. Bombers deviated, some falling short, others striking unintended targets. The defenders adapted, learning patterns, anticipating runs, and improvising shelters. Every attack was met with resilience. Every day the battle intensified. Hunger and fatigue weighed heavily on the defenders, yet the human spirit refused to break. Each soldier and civilian endured the impossible, improvising with what little they had. Makeshift weapons, rationed food, and relentless courage. By mid-morning, German units began to experience attrition. Supplies were delayed. Exhausted soldiers moved cautiously. The defenders, though under constant pressure, exploited this hesitation, mounting counterattacks in narrow streets, reclaiming lost ground, and reinforcing barricades. Across Leningrad, communication became a lifeline. Couriers risked sniper fire to carry orders. Makeshift signal systems coordinated movements across shattered streets. Every action was synchronized, a fragile web of strategy and survival that kept the city alive. Factories turned into fortresses. Workers operated machinery by day, then shifted to repairing weapons and barricades by night. Streets that once carried trams and pedestrians now transported ammunition, firewood, and the wounded. The city's heartbeat became the rhythm of war. Tanks ground forward through shattered streets, their treads crushing debris and frozen rubble. Infantry followed, rifles at the ready, moving cautiously, eyes darting to every window, every rooftop. Suddenly, a hidden mine detonated, sending a column of smoke and earth into the frigid air. The German advance paused hesitation that gave snipers the chance to strike. Each step forward became a gamble. Every second could be the last. From the top of a crumbling apartment block, a Red Army sharpshooter leveled his rifle. A single shot took down a German officer, signaling orders to his men. Confusion rippled through the ranks, soldiers ducked for cover, and momentum stalled. Below, civilians reinforced barricades, their hands raw and frozen. They were no longer bystanders, they were the pulse of resistance. Smoke obscured streets like a shifting phantom. German artillery fired blindly, sometimes hitting barricades, sometimes collapsing buildings onto their own men. Tanks advanced, hesitated, retreated slightly, then pressed on. Leningrad was alive with motion and noise, a chaotic symphony of destruction. Night fell, but the fighting did not cease. Fires painted the skyline red. Shadowy figures darted through alleys, carrying ammunition, water, and the wounded. The city seemed endless, its streets twisting, looping, hiding threats. Every step forward revealed another trap, another surprise. Mini cliffhanger. Somewhere in the northern districts, a German tank commander realized he was isolated, and the city was closing in around him. Artillery boomed again, shaking windows and sending plumes of brick and mortar into the sky. Streets turned into impromptu battlegrounds. Soldiers sprinted from cover to cover, bullets whistling past. Civilians pushed carts loaded with rations through smoke-choked avenues, barely pausing to breathe. Survival required speed, luck, and nerves of steel. Their German platoon tried to storm a factory-turned-fortress. Mines concealed under debris blew, sending soldiers sprawling. Red Army forces struck from the shadows, retreating before the enemy could regroup. The factory became a fortress of resistance, an island of defiance amid encroaching chaos. Planes droned overhead, their engines slicing through smoke and cold air. Bombs dropped with a scream, shaking buildings to their foundations. Anti-aircraft crews fired blindly, hoping for a hit. Civilians ducked under stairwells, praying the walls would hold. Every moment was a fight against physics, fire, and fate. Mini cliffhanger. In the south, an infantry company discovered a secret tunnel beneath a bombed-out street. Could it turn the tide of the local battle? The Neva River became a corridor of tension. Artillery shells splashed into icy waters, while barges fired upon approaching German units. Bridges groaned under the weight of tanks, soldiers, and desperation. Snowflakes mingled with smoke, blurring vision. Every crossing was a calculated risk. One misstep could trap hundreds. In a courtyard, civilians formed human chains to move supplies. Bread, bullets, water. Each item passed hand to hand, a fragile thread of survival. Soldiers coordinated with them, guiding movements, covering flanks, checking for snipers. The urban battlefield demanded improvisation, and every decision carried consequence. Tanks clashed with barricades again. Metal screeched, wood splintered, and fire erupted. Infantry engaged in street-to-street combat, shouting orders, ducking behind debris. The city fought back not with machine guns, but with its geometry, its streets, its hidden alleys. Mini cliffhanger. A sudden explosion in the eastern sector cut communications commanders had only seconds to react before chaos spread. Inside a bombed-out school, Red Army units regrouped. Civilians sheltered in basements, listening to distant artillery, counting the seconds between blasts. Sharpshooters peeked from shattered windows, measuring the enemy's advance. Even in devastation, coordination persisted, every soldier aware that the line between life and death was measured in meters and minutes. German engineers attempted to clear barricades, but hidden explosives halted progress. Snipers struck from above, and every step became a potential trap. Momentum shifted again and again, each side adapting, improvising, surviving. The streets had become a deadly chessboard. Planes dipped low, strafing streets with relentless precision. Anti-aircraft rounds sprayed skyward, exploding overhead. Civilians prayed, soldiers ducked, and the city endured. Each second stretched endlessly, filled with the tension of uncertainty. Mini cliffhanger. From a high-rise, a lone observer spotted a vulnerable flank in the German advance, but would the information reach commanders in time? The northern districts were engulfed in smoke and fire. Tanks pushed forward, infantry staggered behind, and barricades slowed the relentless tide. Civilians moved silently, guided by instinct, carrying water and ammunition. Red Army units struck from hidden alleys, fading into rubble before counterattacks could arrive. A German officer shouted orders over the roar of battle. Tanks pressed forward into narrow streets, unaware of traps laid beneath ice and snow. Explosions ripped the air apart. Momentum shifted in unpredictable bursts. Victory seemed a breath away, then snatched back by an unseen hand. The city became both battlefield and participant. Every street turned to a corridor of danger, every building a potential fortress. Civilians became combatants, soldiers relied on improvisation, and every decision echoed with deadly consequence. Mini cliffhanger. In the industrial quarter, a German column advanced, then vanished into the smoke, leaving only silence and uncertainty behind. German columns advanced cautiously through the industrial quarter. Smoke and fire coiled around twisted steel, hiding the enemy's next move. Streets had been transformed into death traps, barricades, mines, and hidden gun positions. Every step forward required nerves of steel. Red Army units moved silently, striking and retreating before the enemy could respond. Snipers picked off officers signaling commands, machine gunners fired from hidden windows, and civilians carried vital supplies across streets shredded by artillery. Leningrad itself had become an omnipresent adversary. Artillery boomed relentlessly. German batteries sought to flatten strongpoints. Soviet crews returned fire with calculated precision. Buildings quaked, glass shattered, and dust choked the air. Every salvo shifted the momentum, forcing soldiers to adapt or perish. Mini cliffhanger. A lone German tank separated from its unit, stalled in the eastern sector, and Red Army forces circled silently, ready to strike. The Neva River was a frozen corridor of tension. Floating batteries fired with meticulous calculation, their shells plowing through snow and ice toward advancing troops. Engineers repaired bridges under constant fire, each crossing a deadly gamble. Civilians aided, dragging supplies and wounded to safety. German infantry attempted flanking maneuvers, but were funneled into kill zones. Mines concealed beneath ice detonated, slowing their advance. Sharpshooters picked off soldiers as they struggled to regroup. The city's streets were a web, guiding enemy movements into traps. Planes cut low over rooftops, releasing payloads with surgical intent. Anti-aircraft crews fired blindly, their tracers streaking through the smoky sky. Civilians and soldiers alike adapted, learning the rhythm of each assault. Every second was a negotiation with death. Mini cliffhanger. In the western sector, a factory suddenly erupted in flames inside. Vital supplies were trapped, and no one knew if they could be salvaged. Nightfall brought little relief. Fires illuminated streets in jagged orange, shadows twisting into shapes of menace. Soldiers moved in silence, each step echoing over rubble. Snipers struck from roofs, machine guns raked intersections. Civilians huddled in basements, eyes wide, praying that walls held. German engineers tried to breach a barricade in the southern district. Hidden explosives detonated, sending debris flying. Soldiers scrambled, their advance halted by a single miscalculation. The city's geography became a weapon in itself. Every corner, every alley, every ruined building part of an intricate defensive network. Radio lines crackled with garbled communication. Orders were delayed or misinterpreted. Momentum stalled, confusion spreading among German ranks. Meanwhile, Red Army commanders repositioned reserves, exploiting every pause, every mistake. Mini cliffhanger. Somewhere in the northern suburbs, a civilian-led sabotage team prepared to destroy a key supply depot, risking everything for the survival of the city. The industrial quarter burned with relentless fury. Factories, once centers of production, became fortresses, firing on advancing troops. German tanks stalled in narrow streets, infantry trapped behind barricades. Explosions echoed across the city, smoke curling into the winter sky. Civilians carried rations through shattered streets, their faces frozen from cold and fear. Red Army units struck from hidden alleys, vanishing before reinforcements could respond. Each small victory shifted momentum, but at a tremendous cost. Above, planes screamed through the clouds. Bombs fell in calculated arcs. Anti-aircraft rounds fired in desperate patterns. The city was alive, breathing chaos, each second a contest of endurance and strategy. Mini cliffhanger. A lone courier carrying critical intelligence was cornered in a burning street. Would the information reach command in time? Across the northern sectors, snow began to fall. It was light at first, then thick, blanketing streets and rubble. Movement slowed, weapons froze, visibility dropped. Yet fighting continued unabated. The cold became an enemy of its own, sapping strength, chilling bones, and testing resolve. Tanks skidded on ice, infantry stumbled over frozen debris. Supplies grew scarce, ammunition had to be conserved. Civilians and soldiers alike adapted, turning frost and snow into camouflage, using the frozen landscape to set traps and ambushes. German commanders, confident in strategy, began to realize the city's endurance was greater than intelligence reports had predicted. Momentum wavered. Hesitation crept into once precise movements. Mini cliffhanger. In the south, a sudden blizzard threatened to isolate an entire regiment cut off from supplies and command, survival hung by a thread. Inside a shattered school, Red Army troops reorganized. Civilians brought hot water, rationed bread, and ammunition. Snipers trained from broken windows, machine guns mounted on barricades. The city's pulse was a rhythm of resistance, coordinated despite chaos, cold, and constant bombardment. German tanks advanced through streets littered with rubble. Mines detonated beneath treads. Infantry advanced cautiously, wary of hidden snipers. Momentum shifted, counterattacks erupted, and every street corner became contested ground. The clash was relentless. Fires illuminated night skies, smoke tangled with snow, planes roared overhead. Each hour, each minute, each second tested human endurance. Mini cliffhanger. A strategic intersection in the northern sector became a trap for an entire German company. Could they escape before being encircled? Factories continued to fire relentlessly. Barricades slowed tank columns, forcing infantry into narrow kill zones. Red Army units struck with precision, retreating before counterfire could respond. Civilians transported supplies, water, and the wounded, silently defying the destruction surrounding them. A German battalion attempted to breach a fortified apartment block. Mines exploded, snipers struck, momentum stalled. Commanders barked orders over the roar of battle. Every step forward was a negotiation with chaos. Above, the sky filled with smoke, tracer fire, and the scream of aircraft. Civilians ducked into basements. Soldiers moved street to street. The city itself became a labyrinth of defense. Mini cliffhanger. A German officer, separated from his unit, spotted an undefended supply cache, but reaching it could cost his life. The Neva River froze further, limiting crossings but creating new defensive opportunities. Red Army floating artillery platforms fired at advancing columns, their shells exploding through ice and snow. Engineers rushed to repair bridges under enemy fire, each second critical. Civilians assisted wherever possible, moving supplies and aiding the wounded. German forces attempted another flanking maneuver. Mines, snipers, and improvised barricades delayed them. Momentum slowed. Every street in Leningrad became a corridor of risk, each building a potential trap. Night fell once more, but fighting persisted. Explosions illuminated streets, fires burned relentlessly, and smoke mingled with falling snow. The city was alive with chaos. Mini cliffhanger. In the western sector, a small Red Army unit prepared an ambush that could change the battle's momentum. If it succeeded, victory might tilt. The northern districts were a maze of fire, smoke, and frozen rubble. German tanks skidded across icy streets. Infantry pressed cautiously behind, their movement slowed by debris. Mines detonated under treads, hiding in snow and shadows. Every advance was contested, every street a battlefield. Civilians carried supplies silently, their breath visible in the frigid air. Red Army units emerged from ruined buildings, striking swiftly before disappearing into basements and alleys. Momentum shifted like the wind, unpredictable and relentless. Planes screamed overhead, dropping bombs with deadly precision. Anti-aircraft crews returned fire, tracers cutting through smoke and snow. The city fought back in every conceivable way, its streets, rivers, and buildings active participants in the defense. Mini Cliffhanger, a German column separated from its support, reached the edge of a ravine and found it blocked by frozen debris and hidden mines. The industrial quarter burned unchecked. Factories, once productive, now erupted in fire, sending sparks into the smoky sky. Tanks rumbled forward, but became trapped in narrow alleys. Infantry advanced cautiously, aware that snipers and hidden explosives awaited at every turn. Civilians transported ammunition, water, and medical supplies. Women, children, and the elderly became lifelines for soldiers, threading through crossfire with quiet courage. The city's human fabric had become a weapon as potent as any artillery shell. Sudden artillery strikes tore through the streets. German units faltered, regrouping under fire. Red Army sharpshooters struck from rooftops, sniping officers and disrupting communications. Chaos ruled, yet coordination persisted, a testament to planning, resilience, and adaptability. Mini Cliffhanger. In a bombed-out apartment, a small Red Army squad prepared a counterattack that could encircle an entire German regiment if executed perfectly. The Never River froze solid, turning waterways into natural barriers. Floating artillery platforms fired relentlessly at advancing German columns. Ice cracked under the impact of shells, echoing across the city. Bridges groaned as engineers reinforced them under fire, each repair a race against destruction. German infantry attempted flanking maneuvers, only to be funneled into ambushes. Mines, barricades, and snipers awaited, punishing every misstep. Leningrad's streets became traps, guiding the enemy into carefully orchestrated kill zones. Nightfall brought limited visibility but not respite. Fires illuminated silhouettes of soldiers, civilians, and ruins. Smoke twisted into patterns that concealed movement. Every second was a negotiation with fate. Mini Cliffhanger. In the eastern sector, a German officer spotted an undefended warehouse, but retrieving supplies meant crossing open, deadly streets. Inside a shattered school, Red Army troops reorganized. Civilians carried water, bread, and ammunition, working in rhythm with soldiers. Snipers took positions in broken windows, machine guns fired from barricades. Coordination persisted despite destruction, cold, and constant bombardment. German tanks advanced through streets clogged with debris. Mines detonated under treads. Infantry staggered behind, every move fraught with danger. The city's geometry, combined with human ingenuity, made progress agonizingly slow. Planes roared overhead, bombs fell, anti-aircraft tracers streaked skyward. Every hour, minute, and second was a contest of endurance and adaptability. Mini Cliffhanger. A lone German reconnaissance team ventured into an abandoned district, then disappeared entirely under a hail of hidden fire. Across northern streets, snow fell thick and heavy. Tanks slid on icy roads. Infantry struggled over debris. Supplies dwindled. Cold gnawed at soldiers and civilians alike. Yet fighting continued, relentless and desperate. Red Army units struck from hidden alleys, then melted into rubble. Mines slowed armored vehicles. Barricades blocked roads. Civilians reinforced defenses with improvised weapons and barricades. The city refused to surrender. German commanders realized that calculated maneuvers were failing. Momentum faltered. Every advance required new improvisation, and time was running short. Mini Cliffhanger. In the south, a sudden blizzard threatened to isolate an entire battalion. Cut off from support, they faced a choice between retreat or destruction. Factories continued to resist. Barricades forced tanks into narrow kill zones. Red Army units hit and retreated. Civilians carried supplies and water. Every street was contested, every building a potential fortress. Her German company attempted to breach a fortified apartment block. Mines detonated, snipers struck, momentum stalled. Orders were shouted over the roar of artillery. Each movement carried life or death stakes. Above, tracer fire cut through smoke and snow. Civilians ducked into basements. Soldiers moved cautiously. Leningrad's streets became a labyrinth of danger and opportunity. Mini Cliffhanger. A Red Army squad prepared a night assault on a German-held intersection, risking everything to seize control. The Neva's frozen expanse became both shield and trap. Floating artillery fired shells that shattered ice. Engineers rushed to repair bridges under fire, while civilians helped carry the wounded and supplies. German forces attempted another flank, only to meet mines and ambushes. Momentum slowed. Every street and building was a gauntlet, snow-muffled sound but not danger. Winter had become an ally to the defenders, a silent participant in the battle, mini cliffhanger. In the western sector, a German regiment found their supply line severed. How long could they hold before the city swallowed them? By now, days of relentless fighting had exhausted both sides. Tanks stalled in icy streets, infantry huddled behind barricades, civilians carried supplies in near silence. Fires burned uncontrolled, smoke obscured vision, and snow fell like ash. Yet the defenders adapted continuously. Every mistake was exploited, every opening punished. Red Army units launched counterattacks in narrow alleys, snipers struck from hidden rooftops, and civilians moved supplies where the army could not. Momentum shifted repeatedly, unpredictable and chaotic. The city itself had become an omnipresent adversary, fighting alongside its defenders. Mini cliffhanger. A German officer attempted a daring charge through the central square unaware that an ambush of unseen proportions waited. The clash continued, relentless. Factories, streets, rivers and rooftops became the chessboard of survival. Every explosion, every bullet, every maneuver echoed through the city. Civilians became combatants, soldiers became strategists, and Leningrad itself was a weapon of resistance. As the first month of fighting drew to a close, exhaustion weighed heavily on all. Supplies were stretched, snow deepened, fires raged, and artillery never ceased. Yet the city had survived the initial storm. Momentum had stalled, the siege had begun, but victory remained uncertain for either side. Mini cliffhanger. With both sides exhausted, commanders prepared for the next phase of the siege where endurance, ingenuity, and sheer willpower would determine who survived and who perished. Winter deepened. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing Leningrad in white silence, hiding trenches, barricades, and deadly mines. German troops, exposed in frozen streets, struggled with equipment that froze, rations that dwindled, and morale that sagged. Even the most disciplined units began to falter under the weight of attrition. Meanwhile, Soviet engineers reinforced defensive positions, turning rubble into fortresses. Bridges were camouflaged, supplies stockpiled in secret, and sniper nests multiplied in predictable and unpredictable locations. Every street became a trap, every corner a potential ambush. Commanders on both sides recognized a subtle shift. The defenders were enduring, adapting, and improvising far better than anticipated. For the first time, German forces were forced to slow, rethink, and divert resources to maintain momentum. Mini cliffhanger. On the outskirts, a Red Army division discovered a weakly defended supply route. If exploited, it could change the immediate tactical balance. The discovery of the Lake Ladoga ice road marked a critical moment. Civilians and soldiers moved supplies across the frozen water, using sleds, trucks, and even horse-drawn carts. Food, fuel, and ammunition flowed steadily, defying German expectations. German commanders had anticipated surrender through starvation. Instead, the city adapted. Each successful transport bolstered morale and allowed the defenders to mount counterattacks. Snow became an ally, shielding movement and masking troop concentrations. German reconnaissance struggled. Overextended supply lines, extreme cold, and hidden Soviet movements disrupted carefully laid plans. Tanks bogged down in ice and rubble, infantry advanced cautiously, and artillery fell short of decisive impact. Mini cliffhanger. A German commander ordered a concentrated assault on the northern districts unaware that Soviet reinforcements were lying in wait, ready to strike. Red Army intelligence played a pivotal role. Scouts and partisans intercepted German communications, relaying troop positions, artillery schedules, and weak points to city commanders. This allowed precise counterattacks and defensive repositioning. Zhukov and other officers leveraged the advantage with ruthless efficiency. Artillery fire targeted enemy concentrations, while infantry struck vulnerable flanks. Civilians guided soldiers through hidden alleys, delivering supplies and messages under constant threat. The human factor, endurance, ingenuity, and adaptability became the true weapon of the defenders. German commanders were forced into cautious movements, each decision weighed against uncertainty, attrition, and fatigue. Mini cliffhanger. A German panzer division, attempting a flanking maneuver, encountered an unexpected barricade that could halt their advance entirely. Winter storms intensified, visibility dropped, artillery became less effective, and frozen streets slowed movement. German forces, relying on precision and mobility, struggled to maintain momentum. Troops were exhausted, cold, and under constant harassment from snipers and ambushes. The defenders, familiar with the city's layout, used the weather to their advantage. Hidden firing positions, ice-covered canals, and snow-obscured barricades allowed Red Army units to inflict maximum damage while minimizing exposure. A small, well-timed counterattack in the southern districts shattered a German infantry regiment, forcing a hasty retreat. Confidence surged among defenders, while German morale began to waver under the combined pressure of weather, attrition, and urban resistance. Mini cliffhanger. Reports arrived that German supply lines were under partisan attack. What could this mean for the advancing columns? Partisan activity disrupted German logistics across the surrounding forests. Supplies destined for frontline units were destroyed or delayed. Roads were blocked with trees and ice, bridges sabotaged. Every delay amplified the pressure on overstretched units already battling the frozen streets of Leningrad. German command attempted to consolidate and regroup, yet every pause allowed the Red Army to reinforce weak points, reposition artillery, and coordinate counterattacks. Leningrad's defenders were no longer reactive. They had seized initiative. From makeshift command posts, Soviet officers orchestrated simultaneous strikes across multiple sectors, targeting German weaknesses and overextended units. Timing, coordination, and local knowledge turned the tide in subtle but decisive ways. Mini cliffhanger. In the northern districts, a German regiment trapped between barricades and snipers faced annihilation unless reinforcements could arrive fast. The human cost was enormous, yet it spurred innovation and coordination. Civilians transported ammunition through bombed-out streets, repaired barricades overnight, and improvised shelters for the wounded. Soldiers adapted to extreme cold, limited rations, and constant danger. Survival became synonymous with resistance. German forces, by contrast, suffered mounting casualties and mechanical failures. Tanks stalled on icy streets, artillery misfired, and infantry units fragmented under repeated ambushes. Commanders scrambled to adjust tactics, but momentum had shifted irrevocably. Mini cliffhanger. A bold Soviet operation in the industrial quarter aimed to encircle a critical German regiment's success would signal the first major strategic victory in months. At the heart of the city, Red Army snipers and machine gunners coordinated with civilians to create lethal intersections. Streets, bridges, and courtyards became deadly funnels. German units attempting frontal assaults suffered disproportionate losses. The city itself seemed to push back against the invaders. Meanwhile, intelligence indicated growing confusion among German divisions. Orders were delayed, conflicting, or ignored. Logistics collapsed in sectors under sustained ambushes. Soldiers realized that each advance came at increasingly high cost. The defenders, conversely, adapted constantly. Barricades were rebuilt, fire positions rotated, and supply caches hidden. The initiative had passed into Leningrad's hands. Mini cliffhanger. A German attempt to capture a key artillery position failed spectacularly, leaving the southern approach exposed. Red Army engineers reinforced frozen bridges, constructed makeshift tunnels, and created concealed firing positions. Civilians contributed tirelessly, moving supplies, guiding troops, and tending the wounded. Each success, however small, added layers of resistance that German forces had not anticipated. Winter conditions, once seen as neutral, now favored defenders. Troops accustomed to extreme cold moved swiftly. Vehicles that depended on mobility became liabilities. German commanders attempted rapid assaults, but streets turned into traps, vehicles were immobilized, and units isolated. Mini cliffhanger. A German assault column, low on ammunition and surrounded by snow, faced a sudden counterstrike that could end their advance entirely. The industrial quarter became a crucible of resistance. Factories, warehouses, and abandoned buildings transformed into strategic strongpoints. Artillery targeted advancing troops, snipers harassed flanks, and barricades funneled enemy movement into kill zones. Every German maneuver was anticipated, every advance punished. In the northern districts, partisans disrupted communications and supply chains. German units became disoriented, coordination faltered. The defenders had achieved a subtle but critical advantage: initiative. Mini cliffhanger. A German commander attempted a desperate maneuver to break encirclement in action that could cost him an entire regiment. Soviet counterattacks became increasingly bold. Infantry, artillery, and civilians coordinated strikes that disrupted German advances, severed supply lines, and recaptured strategic points. Snipers in rooftops and ruins picked off officers and machine gun crews, forcing retreats under fire. German morale declined steadily. Exhausted troops, cold and hungry, faced relentless harassment. Tank columns became easy targets on narrow streets. Infantry units were funneled into ambushes. Every advantage tilted further toward the defenders. Mini cliffhanger. In the southern industrial sector, an entire German battalion was cut off encircled in a maze of barricades, mines, and sniper fire. The combination of winter, urban complexity, civilian support, and tactical ingenuity reached its zenith. German assaults stalled across multiple sectors. Tanks and infantry advanced only to be bogged down by snow, debris, and hidden obstacles. The defenders' initiative dominated the battlefield. Commanders like Zhukov executed coordinated counterattacks, using intelligence, terrain, and timing to maximum effect. Artillery barrages struck vulnerable flanks, while infantry infiltrated streets, isolating enemy units. The psychological impact was decisive. German troops began to doubt, hesitate, and retreat in some sectors. Mini cliffhanger. A German regiment trapped in the northern districts faced annihilation unless they surrendered or executed a miracle escape. By midwinter, the battle had reached its turning point. Supply lines for the Germans were severely disrupted. Morale sagged. Operational momentum was lost. The defenders had adapted, improvised, and endured, turning the siege into a battle of attrition that favored Leningrad. The human factor, resilience, ingenuity, and determination had shifted the battlefield. Every day of survival strengthened the city's position. German commanders had underestimated the defenders' capacity for endurance and adaptation. Mini cliffhanger. A decisive Red Army operation was planned to exploit the stalled German advance. Success could secure the city's survival and mark the first major victory in the siege. Aftermath and consequences. The city had endured. Fires still burned across streets, smoke curling into a grey winter sky, but the German advance had stalled. Tanks sat immobilized in frozen rubble, infantry regrouped, and the defenders held key districts with renewed confidence. Leningrad, battered but unbroken, remained a fortress against impossible odds. Civilians emerged from basements and shelters, their faces marked by exhaustion, hunger, and determination. Each person carried stories of survival, small victories, and tragic losses. The human cost was enormous, yet the city's spirit remained unshaken. Survival itself had become an act of defiance. German commanders were forced to reassess. Initial expectations of rapid surrender were shattered. Logistics were strained, morale declined, and the harsh winter compounded every misstep. What had been a straightforward siege became a drawn-out struggle that exhausted men, machinery, and resources. Mini cliffhanger. Across the city, command posts buzzed with cautious optimism, but the war was far from over. Every decision now carried consequences for the next phase of battle. Artillery fire had subsided, but its effects lingered. Buildings, once homes and factories, were reduced to rubble. Streets were scarred with craters, and bridges bore the weight of repairs yet to be completed. The city's infrastructure had survived, but it would take months, if not years, to restore fully. Red Army units, despite exhaustion, quickly moved to secure strategic points. Bridges, docks, and supply depots were reinforced. Barricades and fortifications were rebuilt, prepared for any renewed assault. Winter had bought the defenders time. Preparation turned that time into opportunity. The German forces retreated into defensive positions, regrouping under mounting pressure. Their momentum lost, every subsequent attack became increasingly costly. The initial plan for a swift siege had failed, replaced by a grinding battle of attrition that favored the city's defenders. Mini cliffhanger. Reports of heavy casualties and disrupted supply lines filtered back to German command forces were stretched to breaking points. Casualties on both sides were significant, though the exact numbers were difficult to determine amidst the chaos. Thousands of soldiers had perished or been wounded, tanks and artillery were destroyed or immobilized, and civilians suffered shortages of food, fuel, and medical care. Yet even in devastation, acts of heroism and endurance defined the city's narrative. Hospitals and makeshift clinics worked tirelessly, often under bombardment, to treat the injured. Civilians volunteered, assisting medical teams, carrying the wounded, and improvising equipment. Despite scarcity and exhaustion, the collective effort saved countless lives. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers hardened by urban combat and civilians who had survived weeks of siege shared a bond of resilience. Leningrad was no longer simply a city, it was a symbol of endurance against overwhelming odds. Mini cliffhanger. Commanders on both sides now faced a stark reality. This battle had altered the trajectory of the war on the Eastern Front. Territorial consequences were immediate. Key districts in Leningrad remained firmly under Soviet control, preventing German forces from establishing a foothold. Supply routes, rivers, and bridges were defended with renewed vigilance. Each lost advance was a blow to the attackers' strategic objectives. The siege also demonstrated the limits of mechanized warfare in urban winter conditions. Tanks, artillery, and infantry could not achieve victory without adequate adaptation to terrain, weather, and determined defenders. Lessons learned here would influence future operations across the Eastern Front. For the defenders, every neighborhood held tactical significance. Factories, residential blocks, and even parks became fortified positions. Commanders reorganized units, reinforced weak points, and coordinated closely with civilian efforts. The city's very structure was weaponized in defense. Mini cliffhanger. Strategists would later look back on Leningrad as a turning point, where human ingenuity, endurance, and urban defense stymied one of the most formidable armies in history. Morale across the city surged despite hardships. Soldiers and civilians alike drew strength from survival. Rations were distributed carefully, water and firewood managed with precision, and every act of defiance reinforced the collective resolve. Leningrad had survived its darkest days, but the cost had been immeasurable. German troops, on the other hand, faced declining morale. The harsh winter, unexpected resistance, and logistical failures eroded confidence. Commanders struggled to maintain discipline, and soldiers questioned the feasibility of continued assaults against a city that refused to break. The battle became a stark illustration of how determination, preparation, and resilience could compensate for numerical or technological inferiority. Every barricade rebuilt, every supply line maintained, and every counterattack executed reinforced this lesson. Mini cliffhanger. While Leningrad had withstood the initial onslaught, both sides prepared for the prolonged struggle that would define the coming months. Long-term strategic consequences emerged. The failure to capture Leningrad prevented German forces from redirecting troops and resources to other operations on the Eastern Front. The drawn-out siege consumed men, material, and morale. Meanwhile, Soviet forces retained a crucial industrial and symbolic hub, bolstering production, coordination, and propaganda efforts. The siege also shaped subsequent urban combat doctrine. Engineers, soldiers, and strategists studied Leningrad's defenses, learning how urban environments could nullify technological superiority, complicate supply lines, and amplify the effect of civilian resilience. Yet the human cost remained high. Starvation, disease, and exposure claimed countless lives among both civilians and soldiers. Families were separated, neighborhoods destroyed, and the city bore scars that would last generations. Mini cliffhanger. Despite devastation, Leningrad had emerged resilient, a city transformed into a symbol of human endurance and strategic ingenuity. The psychological and cultural impact resonated far beyond the city limits. Stories of survival, heroism, and endurance spread, inspiring both soldiers and civilians across the Soviet Union. Leningrad became a rallying point, proving that determined defense, ingenuity, and coordination could withstand the most formidable offensive. Commanders on the German side recognized the limits of their approach. Direct assaults, even with superior firepower, had failed against fortified urban positions and determined defenders. Lessons about logistics, morale, and environmental adaptation would shape subsequent campaigns across the Eastern Front. For Leningrad, the aftermath meant rebuilding, reinforcing, and preparing. The siege had revealed vulnerabilities, but it had also demonstrated the extraordinary capacity of human determination. The city was battered but alive, ready to endure the prolonged struggle ahead. Mini cliffhanger. The lessons of survival and strategy in Leningrad would echo throughout the Eastern Front, shaping the broader trajectory of the war. Soviet forces took stock of the battle. Troop rotations, supply routes, and strategic strongpoints were reinforced. Civilians continued to play an essential role, delivering supplies, maintaining infrastructure, and assisting with defense. The coordination between military and civilian efforts had proven decisive. German forces retreated in sectors where advances had failed. Tanks and artillery were repaired or abandoned. Infantry regrouped. Commanders had to reconsider tactics in the face of urban complexity, environmental challenges, and civilian resilience. The siege had changed everything. Momentum was no longer in the attacker's favor. Each subsequent move would be measured, cautious, and contested. Leningrad had survived, but the war was far from over. Mini cliffhanger. With the city still standing, both sides now prepared for the next phase, a battle of endurance, attrition, and strategic ingenuity that would define the coming winter. The wind still whispers through the shattered streets of Leningrad, carrying the echoes of gunfire, the footsteps of soldiers, and the quiet courage of civilians who refuse to yield. Snow drifts over craters and rubble, masking scars yet revealing resilience. Imagine standing at the edge of a city that has been pushed to the brink, where every building is a battlefield, every alleyway a trap, and every human heart a fortress. Leningrad survived not because of a single plan or a single army, but because of countless acts of endurance. Soldiers adapted to frozen streets and relentless attacks. Engineers repaired bridges in the dead of night. Civilians carried food, ammunition, and hope through the chaos. Each person became a piece in a vast living defensive machine, defying what seemed inevitable. The German advance, initially unstoppable, faltered under conditions it had not anticipated. Winter, urban complexity, civilian ingenuity, and the raw determination of a city unwilling to surrender. Tanks stalled in snow, infantry advanced cautiously, and supply lines collapsed under constant strain. The momentum that had promised rapid victory disintegrated, leaving only attrition, hesitation, and human endurance. Reflecting on this, one cannot ignore the lessons that echo beyond the siege itself. Leadership matters, not just in issuing orders, but in perceiving changing realities and inspiring resilience. Logistics, often underestimated, determine whether a force thrives or falters. Terrain, climate, and human factors can nullify numerical or technological superiority. Most of all, survival and resistance emerge from unity, the intertwining of civilians, soldiers, and the environment itself into a single, adaptive force. The Siege of Leningrad was not a simple story of victory or defeat. It was a narrative of survival against overwhelming odds, a testament to human courage under pressure, and a lesson in how endurance can become a weapon as formidable as any artillery barrage. In the frozen streets, amidst smoke and rubble, history itself revealed the power of persistence, ingenuity, and collective will. As the city held, the broader war shifted. Leningrad's resilience tied down enemy resources, disrupted plans, and inspired resistance across the Eastern Front. Its story became a symbol proof that even the mightiest armies could be checked, even overmatched forces could endure. And that strategy without understanding human, environmental, and urban complexities is incomplete. So as you look at the map, at the frozen Neva, at the streets scarred by battle, remember the weight of endurance. Leningrad's survival reminds us that history is not only written by victories, but also by those who refuse to be defeated. Thank you for witnessing this story with me. Remember, history is alive, waiting to teach us, inspire us, and remind us of the courage humanity can summon in its darkest hours. If you found yourself moved by Leningrad's struggle, like, comment, and subscribe to continue exploring the battles that shaped the world.